Hi everyone. Okay, so today we're just going to go over some absolute basic introductory skills about how you can animate text in After Effects. So we're going to create a new project, create a new composition, just call it whatever you like, and we'll set this up as 1920 by 1080 with a frame rate of 25, 20 seconds and a black background should do us just fine, and click OK. First thing I always do is go new, add a solid background color. I'm going to choose this dark cyan, but you can add whatever color you like from this color picker. Click OK, and then I'm just going to lock that just down in our composition by hitting this padlock symbol so we can't alter it or move it accidentally. So kind of unsurprisingly, the tool that's going to do most of the heavy lifting here is the text tool in the tool panel at the top of the After Effects screen. So we're just going to select that, zoom back out, click anywhere in our composition and type out some text. So I'm going to type this in capitals, but science is awesome. So I'm just going to click the selection tool from the tool pane and I can reposition this. Sometimes this happens, and if this happens at the screen you see, it's because you've left caps lock on. So just turn caps lock off and it should reset. Okay, great. So we can reposition our text anywhere on the screen manually with the selection tool and just dragging it around the composition. But we might want to actually make sure that it's perfectly vertically and horizontally aligned in the composition. So to do that, we're just going to come over to the right hand side here and we'll see these align options. So we're just going to select the align option, and these little options here just allow us to horizontally and vertically align our text to the composition, indicated by the composition setting in the drop down box just here. You'll notice selection is grayed out, and that's because this selection option allows us to align objects or text to other objects or text. And because we only have one at the moment, we don't have anything to align it to. So composition's our only option. So similarly, if I just come back over to the text and double click, I can click within the text and then hit enter, for example, to pop this down onto a new line. And then if I come to the selection tool and select it again, see that I can come back up to our align options, and I can, for example, align it to the right of the composition, to the left of the composition, but I'm just going to put this back to horizontal and centrally aligned. So the next option we're going to look at over here is the character options. So we're just going to select character just here, and these gives us our options, for example, to change all of the different font types to whatever we might want, and we can change the size of the text just here. We can also change the vertical alignment of the individual letters, for example, and we can enter those values manually or scrub that from right to left. We can also add superscript or subscript options just there and turn it into italicized and all the rest. So this is the place where you can play around with the majority of the character options. Just undo that to get back to what we had originally. Similarly, you can change the color of the text by selecting this option here and just selecting from any color you like from the color picker. I'm going to click cancel to keep white just now. And the final option we're going to take a quick look at just here is the paragraph option just on the left. And this just allows us to align our text either sort of centrally or to the right or to the left. And it's worth noting that you can, for example, double click on letters or words within an individual text layer and align them separately to other words within the same text layer. One thing it's probably worth mentioning is if you're in the text box and you're actually trying to type some text, whereas normally you could hit V as on the keyboard shortcut to select the object and then deselect it, hitting V will obviously type the letter V. So it's just worth noting that you actually have to come up and select the selection tool from the tool option just up here, rather than actually hitting the shortcut key V in this instance. So the other thing I'll point out just at this stage is this little sort of crosshatch just here, and this is the anchor point for the text. So any animation will occur from this particular point. So we'll come back to the rotation options and the scale options in a second, but just to say that you can come up to this tool at the top here and the pan behind tool, select that, and this allows you to move the anchor point within the object or even outside of it, for example. And wherever you move this crosshair is the point from which all of the animation will occur. So the anchor point in space, basically. So I'll just zoom in and I'm going to place the anchor point down in this bottom left corner. So any rotation or scaling or position movement of these letters will occur from this point. So maybe the best way to demonstrate that is to just get straight into the animation side of things. So we'll come down to our composition pane and we'll make sure our text layer is selected. And I'm just going to hit S for the shortcut key to open up our scale options. We'll notice this is currently set to 100%. So we'll just lay a scale keyframe down to make sure that we have our letters at 100% anchored in time, so to speak. And then we'll move our time slider along, let's just say by 10 frames. And then we'll lay our second keyframe down by increasing the scale of this text. And notice how it's expanding from that place where we've placed the crosshair anchor point. And so, for example, we could move that up there and then drag our time slider back to the beginning And between these 10 frames, this is the time across which the animation occurs. So I'll just remove that keyframe for now, just so that we can move on to our next options, which are the rotation options. So I'll hit R on the shortcut key on the keyboard to open up our rotation options just down here. And again, in a similar way, the rotation will occur from this anchor point's position. So if we scrub this to the right or left, we can see that the rotation of the text is occurring from that particular anchor point. So for example, if we come back up to our pan behind tool and select that, and we move the anchor point so that it's somewhere in the center, for example, and then we adjust our rotation options, it's adjusting the rotation from the center of our text. So in a similar way to the scale animation, we do all of the animation in After Effects using keyframes. So we just hit this little rotation stopwatch next to the rotation option there, and then move our time slider along to say 2 seconds, and then we can move our rotation option all the way around to whatever we would like, and that places down our second keyframe. And so all of our animation occurs from that anchor point over the course of that 2 seconds. Okay, so the next option that you might want to play around with quite a lot are the position options. So you can change the location of text in X and Y space within your composition. So with our text layer selected, we'll hit the P on the shortcut key to open up our position options. Again, here's our little stopwatch with which we'll control the changes in position over time. So we'll just make sure that we've put our first stopwatch down for our position of this text at this place in time. And then we can move our time slider across by 10 seconds. And then we can adjust these numbers here, which are X and Y space. And so, for example, if we were just to adjust our X space, we could move it off the screen, for example. So then this animation would take the text off the screen over that 10 frames. Alternatively, we could adjust both X and Y space at the same time, and then our animation would move along the diagonal. So if we want our animation to move from one location to another, then pause for a short while, the easiest way to do this is just to add some additional time at the end of the last keyframe you've added in the position where you want it to be, to move the time slider along a little bit, and then just place another keyframe. And then, for example, you can move the time slider along again and just add a little bit more changes in X and Y space, for example. And so now what we have, if we drag our time slider back to the beginning, is the first 10 frames, the text moves from point A to point B. Then for the next 10 frames, it stays at point B with no further animation. And then for the last 10 frames, it moves from location B to location C. And so you can see the way that you animate text in After Effects is pretty much the same as any other shape. You just use keyframes to control the rotation, scale, or position, for example, of an object over time. And so I'll just delete all these keyframes for a moment, just take it back to the beginning. And the last option that we're going to have a quick look at is our transparency or opacity options. And so with our layer selected, hit T on a shortcut key on our keyboard, we'll see that our opacity options appear just here. And so we can control the opacity of a particular object over time. So for example, if I lay down the first keyframe here at 0 seconds, then move this along by 10 frames, and then scrub that all the way down to 0, we'll see that it disappears. And then we can move it along by another 10 frames, for example, and we can scroll that right back up to 100% again. And so over these 20 frames, we'll see that it disappears and then reappears. Modifying the opacity keyframes can also be quite useful for creating a sort of flashing effect. So for example, if we move this along by another 10 frames, and then we scrub this down to, let's say, we scrub this down to 30%, and then we move it along by another 10 frames, and then we scrub it up to 100%, and we move it along with another 10 frames, we move it down to 30% again, and then let's move it along one more time, so we've got to 100%. We can see that we can actually create a sort of flashing effect. And if we wanted to make that sort of a little bit more perpetual, we could just duplicate the keyframes. So for example, highlight these last two, which is our 30% keyframe here and then our 100% keyframe here. Click Command C or Control C on a PC, move to our last keyframe, hit +10 to move along 10 frames, and then paste. Move it along again, +10 frames, and then hit paste. And then if we highlight all of these and just right click Keyframe Assistant and Easy Ease to add a little bit more motion to the animation, we can see that we have a sort of flashing effect. So that's the basics of using opacity, position, rotation, and scale to make some really basic animations of text. The last thing I'm going to show you, which I think I use quite a lot, is how you can use just basic shapes like rectangles to allow text to disappear at certain locations within the composition that aren't necessarily the edge of the composition. So to show you what I mean, I'm just going to open up the position keyframes of this text layer by hitting P as a shortcut key. And if we were to want this text to disappear, currently we would have to take it all the way off the edge of the screen, for example. But for example, if we wanted to instead make this text disappear halfway down the screen, so let's just say here in the middle of the screen, we can do that by just adding a rectangle of the same color of the background to the middle of our composition. So it blends in, but our text disappears behind it. So to show you what I mean, I'm just going to come up to our selection tool in the tools panel here, select that, and then click off the text so that we can then click the rectangle option and draw a rectangle on the composition without accidentally creating a proper mask for this layer. So this allows us to draw an actual shape layer rather than a mask layer. Now if this rectangle here above this text layer in the drawing order in the composition pane, so see it's above the Science is Awesome text layer here in the composition pane, if we now change the location in X and Y space of our text layer, it disappears behind this rectangle. And the rectangle doesn't appear purely because it's blending in perfectly with the background. If your rectangle doesn't blend in perfectly with the background, come up to these options at the top here and just make sure that your fill option is selected for solid fill, not for none. And make sure that your stroke option is selected with no fill rather than solid color to make sure there's no outline. And also ensure that your fill color is the same color as the background color of your composition. You can always use this eyedropper if you've forgotten this precise hex color code that you've used. So this can obviously be useful in both directions because we can lay down our keyframes for our position of our text while it's currently hidden behind this rectangular layer. Then we can move it on, for example, by 1 second or 25 frames and just change the X and Y position of our text to allow it to appear, for example. So that really is the basics of animating text in After Effects, and by combining these things like changing the scale, opacity and the rotation, in addition to sort of adding in objects to hide text behind or reveal text from, you can actually create quite complex animations in After Effects using just text. So that's everything for this tutorial, but I will do some more tutorials in the future on some slightly more advanced processes where you can use slightly different options to create even more visually appealing graphics using just text. So thanks for tuning in, don't forget to like and subscribe and stay tuned for more tutorials.